Have you ever loved someone who pulls away the moment things get too close? One day they want you deeply, the next day they disappear behind silence, distance, and confusion. And you start asking yourself, if they really love me, why do they run? But what if their distance is not the absence of love? What if the walls they build are actually proof of how terrified they are to lose control, to feel vulnerable, to be hurt? Today, you're going to understand the 6 powerful signs that reveal when an avoidant person truly loves only you, even if they struggle to say it. Most people think love is proven through words, through constant attention, through grand gestures, through emotional intensity. But when you're dealing with someone avoidant, love looks very different. In fact, one of the greatest signs that an avoidant truly loves you is something most people completely miss. They allow you to see the parts of themselves they spend their entire life hiding from the world. You have
Understand something about avoidant people. They are not cold because they feel nothing.
They are distant because they feel too much and learned long ago that vulnerability is dangerous. Somewhere in their past, they connected emotional openness with pain, rejection, disappointment, shame, or loss of control. So they built walls, strong walls, invisible walls, walls that protect them from needing anyone too deeply. And here's what makes this important. Avoidants don't let people pass those walls easily. Most people only experience the surface version of them, calm, independent, detached, in control. But when an avoidant truly loves you, something unusual starts happening. Little by little, cracks begin forming in the armor they spent years perfecting. Maybe one night they suddenly tell you about a fear they never shared with anyone. Maybe they open up about childhood pain. Maybe they admit they overthink everything. Maybe they confess that closeness scares them. And to the average person, these moments might seem small, but for an avoidant, these moments are massive because vulnerability feels like standing emotionally exposed without protection. You see, people often misunderstand avoidance because they expect love to look loud, but avoidant love is usually quiet, subtle, hidden inside actions and moments that only emotionally intelligent people recognize. When an avoidant allows themselves to be emotionally seen by you, they are risking something that terrifies them: emotional dependency. That's why you must pay attention to what they reveal, not only what they say. An avoidant does not casually expose their inner world. If they tell you about their insecurities, their loneliness, their fears of failure, or the emotional battles happening inside their mind, it means they trust you with pieces of themselves they normally protect at all costs. And trust for an avoidant is often deeper than romance itself. Now listen carefully, because this is where many people make mistakes. When avoidants open up emotionally, they often become uncomfortable afterward. They may suddenly pull back. They may become distant. They may act like the conversation never happened. And if you don't understand avoidant psychology, you'll think, they regret loving me. But that's not always true. What's really happening is that vulnerability creates emotional exposure, and exposure creates fear. The avoidant mind starts sounding alarms. You shared too much. You're losing control. You're becoming dependent. You could get hurt. So they retreat, not because the connection means nothing, but because it means too much. And this is why emotionally mature love requires patience and wisdom. You cannot force an avoidant to open up faster. Pressure makes them close down harder. Criticism makes them retreat deeper. But emotional safety changes them slowly over time. When they realize they can be vulnerable without being judged, manipulated, abandoned, or controlled, something extraordinary begins to happen. Their nervous system starts learning that love does not always equal pain. That's when real transformation begins. An avoidant who truly loves you may never become the most emotionally expressive person overnight. They may still struggle with communication. They may still need space sometimes. But if they continue letting you into deeper layers of their emotional world, It means you are becoming a safe place in a life where safety has always been rare. And let me tell you something powerful. People only reveal their authentic self when they feel emotionally secure. Anyone can show confidence. Anyone can pretend to be strong. But revealing fear, revealing sadness, revealing emotional confusion, that requires trust at the deepest level. So if an avoidant lets you see them without the mask, without the performance, without the emotional walls fully up, don't underestimate what that means. Because for them, vulnerability is love, not perfect with ords, not dramatic promises, not constant emotional intensity. Vulnerability. That is the language their heart speaks when they truly care. And here's the deeper truth most people never realize. Avoidants often fear losing themselves inside relationships. They fear being consumed, controlled, or emotionally trapped. So when they willingly step into emotional openness with you, they are fighting against years of internal conditioning. They are choosing connection over protection, even if only in small steps.
That matters.
It matters more than you think, because real love is not measured by how loudly someone expresses emotion. Real love is measured by what someone risks emotionally in order to let you closer. And for an avoidant person, vulnerability is one of the biggest emotional risks they can take. So if they trust you enough to reveal their hidden pain, their silent struggles, and the emotions they normally bury beneath distance and independence, understand what you're witness to. Sing. You are seeing someone slowly lower defenses they once believed they could never live without. And people do not do that for everyone. They do that for the person who truly reaches their heart. One of the most confusing things about loving an avoidant person is this. They pull away right when the connection starts becoming real. Just when you think things are getting deeper, they become distant, colder, harder to reach. And if you don't understand what's happening beneath the surface, you'll assume the worst. You'll think they stopped caring. You'll think the love disappeared. But sometimes the greatest sign an avoidant truly loves you is not that they never leave. It's that no matter how far they run emotionally, they keep finding their way back to you. You have to understand the internal battle happening inside an avoidant person. Part of them deeply wants connection, intimacy, and love. But another part fears being emotionally overwhelmed, controlled, rejected, or hurt. So when feelings become intense, their instinct is often to create distance. Distance makes them feel safe. Distance gives them control. Distance helps them calm the emotional chaos happening inside them. But here's what's important. Avoidants do not repeatedly return to people they feel nothing for. An avoidant can disappear from casual connections very easily. If there's no deep emotional attachment, they can detach and move on without much struggle. But when they truly love someone, something keeps pulling them back emotionally, even when their fear tells them to stay away. That's why their return matters. Maybe they stop texting for a while, then suddenly reach out. Maybe after conflict they withdraw, but eventually reconnect. Maybe they try to act independent, yet somehow they continue checking on you, thinking about you, finding reasons to talk to you, or staying emotionally attached, even when they pretend not to be. These patterns reveal something deeper than temporary emoting.
They reveal emotional significance. Because the truth is, avoidants don't just run from other people. They run from the intensity of their own feelings.
And that's what makes this so complicated. The stronger the connection becomes, the more vulnerable they feel. The more vulnerable they feel, the more their defense mechanisms activate.
Suddenly they need space.
Suddenly they feel trapped. Suddenly they overanalyze everything. Not because the love is fake, but because real intimacy activates fears they spent years trying to avoid. This is why many avoidants seem calm on the outside while experiencing emotional storms internally. They may look detached, but inside they are fighting themselves every day. One side says, I need this person. The other side says, don't get too close or you'll lose control. And when someone keeps returning despite that internal conflict, it means the emotional bond is stronger than the fear trying to push them away. Now, this does not mean unheal. Thy behavior should be excused. Emotional inconsistency can still hurt. Mixed signals can still create pain. But understanding the psychology behind their actions helps you see that their distance is not always the absence of love. Sometimes it's the evidence of emotional overwhelm. And here's something powerful you must remember. People naturally return to what emotionally moves them. An avoidant may distract themselves with work, isolation, hobbies, independence, or temporary escapes. But if their heart is genuinely connected to you, your presence stays alive in their mind. They remember conversations. They replay moments. They think about your energy. Even when they are silent, the emotional attachment often remains active beneath the surface. That's why they come back. Not because they are confused about everyone, because they are emotionally affected by you specifically. And many avoidants hate how deeply they feel that attachment because it challenges the identity they built around emotional self-sufficiency. They want to believe they don't need anyone. They want to feel fully independent. But love interrupts that illusion. Love creates emotional dependence, and that can terrify someone who learned to survive by relying only on themselves. So every time they reconnect, they are fighting an invisible war inside, a war between fear and attachment, between protection and connection, between isolation and love. And the fact that they continue returning tells you something important. The connection means more to them than their pride allows them to admit. You see, people often think love is proven by perfection, but human beings are not perfect, especially emotionally wounded people. Sometimes love shows up in persistence, in the inability to fully let go, in the repeated attempt to reconnect even after fear creates distance. Avoidants may not always know how to sustain closeness consistently, but when they truly love someone, they struggle to completely walk away emotionally. Something inside them keeps reaching back toward the person who touched their heart, and this is where patience becomes important. Not blind patience that tolerates endless disrespect, but wise patience that understands emotional healing takes time. An avoidant who genuinely loves you may move slower emotionally than others. They may need more reassurance, more space, more internal processing. But if they continue making their way back to the connection instead of disappearing forever, it reveals that you occupy a meaningful place in their emotional world. Because avoidants do not repeatedly fight their fear for temporary people. They do it for the person who feels emotionally irreplaceable, and maybe they cannot explain that perfectly yet. Maybe they struggle to express it directly. Maybe their actions are still inconsistent sometimes. But underneath all the confusion, one truth remains powerful. Emotionally detached people do not keep returning to connecting on that do not matter deeply to them. So if an avoidant continues finding reasons to reconnect with you despite their fear of intimacy, despite their emotional walls, despite their instinct to run from vulnerability, understand what you are witnessing. You are witnessing someone whose heart keeps choosing you, even while their fear keeps trying to protect them from love itself. One of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to understand an avoidant person is expecting their love to look obvious. Most people are taught that love is loud, constant compliments, endless emotional conversations, big romantic declarations. But avoidants often express love in ways that are much quieter, much subtler, and much easier to miss if you only listen to words. Because when an avoidant truly loves you, they often reveal it through silent sacrifices nobody else notices. You see, avoidants are usually uncomfortable with emotional exposure. Deep emotional conversations can make them feel vulnerable. Rabel and overwhelmed, saying, "I need you," may feel terrifying to them. Depending emotionally on someone can trigger fear deep inside their nervous system. So instead of expressing love through dramatic emotional intensity, they often communicate it through actions, small actions, consistent actions, protective actions. And if you don't know how to recognize them, you may completely overlook the depth of what they're trying to give you. An avoidant may not always say, "I'm worried about you," but they'll quietly check if you got home safely. They may not openly express affection every hour, but they'll remember tiny details about your life that even other people forget. They may not constantly talk about feelings, but when you're struggling, somehow they show up when it matters most. That is not accidental. That is emotional investment. Because avoidants do not naturally give their energy freely to everyone. Their emotional world is guarded. Their time is protected. Their effort, cunning.
Selective, so when they consistently make sacrifices for your comfort, happiness, or well-being, you are seeing love expressed in the language that feels safest to them action. And here's what makes this powerful. Many avoidants were raised in environments where emotions were not handled safely.
Some learned that vulnerability led to criticism.
Others learned that expressing needs made them weak. Some experienced love that was inconsistent, distant, or emotionally unavailable. So over time, they adapted by becoming self-reliant, independent, controlled, but deep inside, they still want connection like everyone else. The problem is they often don't trust emotional expression fully. Words can feel risky, emotions and feel unstable. Actions feel safer because actions allow them to care without completely losing emotional control. That's why their sacrifices matter. Maybe they rearrange their schedule to help you even when they're exhausted. Maybe they quietly solve planning, blems for you behind the scenes. Maybe they pay attention to your stress levels and try to reduce your burdens in practical ways. Maybe they do thoughtful things without announcing them or asking for praise. That's their heart speaking, not loudly, not dramatically, but sincerely. And often, avoidants will downplay their own efforts because emotional acknowledgement feels uncomfortable for them. They may act casual about things that actually require deep emotional care. They may pretend something wasn't a big deal when internally it meant a lot to them. Why? Because staying emotionally detached feels safer than openly admitting how much someone matters. But actions reveal truth. People can say anything with words, but sacrifices cost energy. Sacrifices require intention. Sacrifices reveal priorities. And when an avoidant repeatedly sacrifices comfort, time, or emotional safety for you, it means you hold a significant place in their life. Now listen carefully because this part matters deeply. Avoidants rarely sacrifice for people they do not truly care about. They may be polite, friendly, respectful, but deep emotional effort, that is reserved for very few people. So when they consistently invest themselves in your happiness, even quietly, it reveals something powerful happening beneath the surface. Love, not performative love. Not attention-seeking love, but intentional love. And honestly, some of the deepest love in the world is quiet. It doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always demand recognition. Sometimes it appears in the person who notices your stress before you say anything. Sometimes it appears in the person who protects your peace in small, invisible ways. Sometimes it appears in the person who struggles with emotional expression, yet still finds ways to support you consistently. That's why emotional intelligence matters in relationships. Because if you only expect love to appear in one form, you may miss it when it arrives differently. Avoidants often love through presence rather than performance. They may sit with you silently during hard moments instead of giving long speeches. They may help you practically instead of emotionally over-explaining everything. They may remember what hurts you and quietly avoid causing that pain again. They may protect your feelings in subtle ways that nobody else notices. And these things matter. Because genuine love is not measured only by emotional intensity. It is measured by care, by effort, by consistency. by sacrifice. Anyone can create temporary excitement, but real care shows up in actions repeated over time. And here's something beautiful about avoidance when they truly love someone. Despite their fear of emotional dependence, they often become incredibly loyal in the ways they know how to express love. Their affection may not always be theatrical, but it becomes deeply woven into the way they treat you, protect you, and prioritize you. You begin noticing that they think, NK about you in decisions. They consider your feelings. They quietly make room for you in their life. They start carrying responsibilities they once only carried for themselves. That shift is enormous for someone who spent most of their life emotionally self-protected, because love for an avoidant is not always about saying everything perfectly. Sometimes it's about doing things they never thought they would do for anyone. And the truth is, quiet sacrifices often reveal deeper emotions than loud promises ever could. Because words can be spoken in a moment, but consistent effort is a choice made again and again. So when an avoidant continuously shows care through actions, support, loyalty, protection, and thoughtful sacrifices, even when emotional expression feels difficult for them, understand what's really happening beneath the surface. You are witnessing someone loving you in the most honest way they know how. Avoidant people are extremely protective of their private world, their thoughts, routines, emotions, dreams, fears, and personal space are usually guarded behind invisible walls that most people never get past. They may socialize, laugh, and spend time with others, but emotionally, they keep a large part of themselves hidden. That is why one of the strongest signs an avoidant truly loves only you is when they slowly begin allowing you into the parts of their life they normally protect from everyone else. You have to understand that privacy is not just a preference for many avoidants, it is emotional security. Their independence feels safe. Their solitude feels controlled. Their routines help them manage emotional overwhelm. So when someone starts entering that carefully protected space, it can feel deeply uncomfortable for them at first. That's why this kind of openness should never be underestimated. When an avoidant truly loves you, they begin making emotional room for you inside a life they once believed only belonged to them. And this shift, usually happens quietly, not all at once. Slowly, naturally. In small moments that reveal growing trust. Maybe they start sharing details about their day without being asked. Maybe they invite you into spaces they normally keep private. Maybe they begin talking about childhood memories, future goals, family dynamics, or personal struggles they never discuss openly. Maybe they allow you to see them during moments when they are mentally exhausted, emotionally stressed, or uncertain about life. For an avoidant person, that is vulnerability. Because letting someone into their inner world means risking emotional closeness. And emotional closeness means risking disappointment, dependency, rejection, or loss of control, the very things they've spent years trying to avoid. But love changes people in subtle ways. When an avoidant begins feeling emotionally safe with you, their instincts slowly start shifting. Instead of protecting every corner of themselves, they begin opening doors. I may still need space. They may still value independence. But now there's a growing desire to include you in parts of their life that once felt untouchable. And that inclusion means more than most people realize. You see, anyone can allow someone into temporary moments. But allowing someone into your real life, your habits, your emotions, your future thoughts, your fears, your daily existence that requires trust, deep trust. Avoidants do not naturally trust easily. That's why when they start involving you in meaningful decisions, discussing long-term ideas, or introducing you to important parts of their personal life, you are witnessing emotional attachment becoming stronger than emotional defense. And often, they won't even realize how significant their behavior is. An avoidant might casually mention future plans that include you. They may begin checking your opinion before making decisions. They may start wanting your presence during important moments. they may introduce why. Or to family members or close friends they usually keep emotionally distant from. These things may appear normal to others, but for an avoidant, they represent major emotional movement because avoidants usually compartmentalize relationships carefully. They separate people from their deeper emotional world in order to maintain control and avoid vulnerability. So when those walls begin coming down around you specifically, it reveals that you are no longer being treated as an outsider emotionally. You are becoming part of their safe space, and that is powerful. Now, many people misunderstand avoidance because they focus only on verbal affection. But emotional access is often far more meaningful than verbal romance. Anyone can say beautiful words, but letting someone fully witness your real life, your imperfections, your stress, your private habits, your insecurities, your emotional rhythms requires genuine emotional trust, especially for someone terrified of vulnerability. Why it matters when an avoidant allows you to see the sides of themselves they usually hide from the world. The tired version, the anxious version, the confused version, the emotionally overwhelmed version. These moments are not weakness. They are evidence that they no longer feel the need to constantly wear emotional armor around you. And love often begins there.
Not in perfection.
Not in performance, but in emotional safety. When someone feels safe enough to stop pretending around you, something real is happening inside their heart. And here's another truth about avoidance that many people fail to understand. They do not invite people deeply into their life unless the connection feels emotionally significant. Casual relationships stay surface level. Temporary people remain outside the walls. But the person they genuinely love begins gaining access to deeper layers of who they are. Their thoughts, their routines, their memories, their dreams, their future, that emotional ace. SS is sacred to them. Because the more you enter their world, the more emotionally real the relationship becomes. And for avoidance, emotional reality can feel both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Beautiful because connection is something they secretly crave. Terrifying because connection creates vulnerability. So every step they take toward including you more deeply in their life is also a step away from the emotional isolation they once depended on for safety. And that takes courage, even if they don't say it directly, even if they still struggle sometimes, even if they occasionally retreat when emotions become overwhelming. The fact that they continue opening their world to you matters deeply, because people naturally protect what feels most sensitive to them. And an avoidant person's inner world is one of the most protected places they have. So if they begin sharing it with you willingly, it means your presence has become emotionally important enough to overcome instincts that once told them to keep everyone at a distance. That is not casual attachment. That is emotional trust growing stronger. And trust is one of the deepest forms of love an avoidant can offer. So when they begin letting you into their routines, their private thoughts, their emotional struggles, their future ideas, and the hidden parts of themselves they rarely reveal to anyone else, understand what is truly happening. You are no longer standing outside the walls they built for protection. You are being invited into the space where their real self lives. One of the clearest signs that an avoidant truly loves you is not that they never feel fear. It's not that they suddenly become emotionally perfect. It's not that they stop struggling with distance, vulnerability, or emotional overwhelm overnight. The real sign is this. Even when fear tells them to run, they still try not to lose you completely. That matters more than most people understand. You see, avoidant people are deeply driven by self-protection. When emotions become intense, their nervous system often reacts as if closeness itself is dangerous. Conflict can feel overwhelming. Emotional expectations can feel suffocating. Vulnerability can feel terrifying. So their instinct is usually to pull away before they feel trapped, exposed, or emotionally consumed. But here's the important part. When an avoidant truly loves someone, they begin fighting against those instincts instead of fully surrendering to them. And that internal fight is enormous. Because you're talking about patterns that were built over years, sometimes decades. Emotional habits created from pain, disappointment, rejection, or environments where emotional safety did not exist. Avoidants learned to survive by staying emotionally controlled and independent. Distance became protection. Detachment became safety. So when they choose to stay emotionally connected despite fear, they are doing something that goes against their deepens. Conditioning. That is not weakness. That is courage. Now, this courage may not always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it appears in small moments. Maybe after an argument, they come back and try to talk instead of disappearing forever. Maybe they struggle to express feelings, but they still attempt to communicate because they don't want the relationship to collapse. Maybe they need space during emotional overwhelm, but eventually they reconnect because losing you hurts more than facing vulnerability. These moments reveal emotional effort, and effort is one of the purest forms of love. Anyone can stay when things feel easy. But when someone with deep fears of intimacy consciously tries to remain emotionally connected instead of fully escaping, it means the relationship has become deeply meaningful to them. Because avoidants do not fight their fears for everyone. Most of the time, if a connection feels emotionally demanding and the attachment is weak, they simply detach, and move on. That's their defense mechanism. But when love becomes real, something changes. Suddenly walking away completely becomes harder. Suddenly, the emotional bond matters enough to create inner conflict. Part of them wants distance.
Another part wants connection. And when they choose to work through that conflict instead of abandoning the relationship entirely, it reveals emotional depth most people never notice. This is why understanding avoidant love requires emotional maturity.
Their progress often happens slowly, imperfectly, quietly. You may not always get grand speeches or flawless communication, but you begin seeing signs that they are trying to stay emotionally present even when it scares them. That effort means everything. Maybe they apologize after shutting down emotionally. Maybe they admit they struggle with closeness. Maybe they attempt difficult conversations they once avoided. Maybe they start recognizing unhealthy patterns in themselves. Maybe they return anyway. Conflict because they cannot emotionally disconnect from you completely. All of these things are evidence of emotional growth, and growth is uncomfortable for avoidance because growth requires vulnerability. It requires facing emotions they spent years suppressing. It requires admitting they care deeply enough to risk pain. It requires allowing another person to matter. That is terrifying for someone whose entire emotional survival strategy was built around needing nobody. But love changes priorities. When an avoidant truly loves you, they begin realizing that emotional safety cannot be built through permanent distance. They start understanding that running every time emotions become intense only creates loneliness. And even though fear still exists inside them, the desire to keep the connection alive becomes stronger than the desire to escape completely. That shift is powerful, because now they are no longer just protecting themselves. They are trying to protect the relationship, too, and that's a major emotional transformation. You see, emotionally unavailable people usually prioritize self-protection above everything else. But when avoidants begin considering your feelings, the relationship's future, and the emotional consequences of their actions, it means love is softening defenses they once thought were permanent, not instantly, not perfectly, but genuinely. And here's something many people overlook. Avoidants often fight their hardest battles internally, not externally. The world may only see silence or distance, but inside they may be struggling with anxiety, emotional confusion, fear of dependency, fear of rejection, and fear of losing control all at once. So when they choose to stay connected despite those fears, even imperfectly, they are doing emotional work most people will never fully understand. That's why patience and emotional intelligence matter so much in these relationships, because healing does not happen through pressure. It has cunning, P-pins through safety. The more emotionally safe an avoidant feels, the more willing they become to remain present during difficult moments instead of escaping from them. They begin learning that conflict does not always mean abandonment. Vulnerability does not always lead to pain. Love does not always destroy independence. And little by little, they start choosing connection more often than avoidance. That's growth. That's trust. And often that's love in its rawest form. Not polished, not perfect, but real. Because real love is not the absence of fear. Real love is the decision to keep showing up despite fear. And for an avoidant person, that decision can require tremendous emotional courage. So if they continue trying, if they keep reconnecting, if they attempt communication even when it feels uncomfortable, if they fight against the urge to disappear completely, if they slowly work on becoming more emotionally present because they don't want to lose you, understand the depth of what you are witnessing. You are witnessing someone choosing love over lifelong defense mechanisms. And people do not make that choice for someone who means nothing to them. They make that choice for the person their heart is truly afraid to lose. One of the most powerful signs that an avoidant truly loves you is this. They slowly begin changing in ways they never changed for anyone else. Not because you forced them, not because you demanded perfection, but because your presence makes them want to become emotionally better than they were before. Now understand something clearly. Avoidants do not change easily. The emotional patterns they carry were built for survival. Independence became their protection. Emotional distance became their shield. Detachment became the way they stayed safe from pain, rejection, disappointment, and vulnerability. For years, they convinced themselves they were fine on their own, that needing people was dangerous, that emotional closeness always cunning and with risk. So when an avoidant begins changing because of love, it is not a small thing. It is huge. Because people only challenge deeply rooted emotional defenses when something feels more valuable than the safety those defenses provide. And when an avoidant truly loves someone, they slowly realize that protecting themselves from love is also preventing them from fully experiencing it. That realization changes everything. At first, the changes may be subtle. Maybe they start communicating a little more consistently. Maybe they become slightly more affectionate. Maybe they begin expressing emotions they once buried immediately. Maybe they start checking in on you more often, opening up more honestly, or making more effort after conflict instead of emotionally disappearing. These small changes may not seem dramatic to outsiders, but for an avoidant person, they represent emotional breakthroughs. Because every step toward emotional openness requires them to confront fears they spent years avoiding. And here's what makes this beautiful. Genuine change is one of the deepest forms of love a human being can offer. Anyone can speak romantic words in emotional moments. Anyone can create temporary excitement. But real love transforms behavior. Real love inspires growth. Real love makes someone examine the parts of themselves that once felt impossible to change. And when an avoidant begins doing that because they don't want to lose you, it reveals how deeply the relationship has touched their heart. You see, avoidants often believe emotional distance protects them from pain. But eventually, when they truly fall in love, they begin noticing something painful. The walls protecting them are also creating loneliness. The distance that once felt safe now starts threatening the connection they care about most. That inner conflict becomes a turning point. because now they have a choice. Stay trapped inside old emotional patterns, or risk vulnerability in order to be. Build something real. And when they choose growth, even slowly, they are choosing love over fear. That does not mean they become perfect overnight. Healing is not instant. Emotional conditioning does not disappear in a week. They may still struggle with communication. They may still need space sometimes. They may still shut down under stress occasionally. But the difference is this. Now there is effort, intentional effort. You begin seeing them challenge behaviors they once defended. You notice them becoming more self-aware. You hear them acknowledging emotional patterns they used to deny. You watch them trying to stay emotionally connected even when it feels uncomfortable. That effort matters deeply, because avoidance rarely changes simply because someone demands it. Pressure often activates more resistance. Criticism often strengthens emotional withdrawal. But love combined with emotional safety creates transformation. When they feel accepted instead of controlled, understood inside, teed of judged, something inside them begins relaxing. For perhaps the first time in their life, closeness no longer feels like a threat. And slowly, they begin becoming more emotionally available because they want the relationship to survive. That's important, not because they are forced, but because they care. And honestly, one of the greatest proofs of love is willingness. Willingness to grow, willingness to heal, willingness to confront uncomfortable truths inside yourself for the sake of a deeper connection. Avoidance may not always express love in dramatic ways, but when they start changing long-held emotional habits because your presence inspires them to become healthier emotionally, you are witnessing one of the sincerest forms of love possible, because change requires vulnerability. It requires admitting the way I've protected myself is also hurting the relationship. It requires acknowledging emotional wounds they may have ignored for years. It requires stepping into uncertainty without guarantees. And that is incredibly difficult for someone whose identity was built around emotional self-protection. But love has a way of awakening parts of people they thought were permanently closed. Suddenly they want to communicate better. Suddenly they want to stay instead of run. Suddenly they want to learn emotional skills they once avoided completely. Not because they stopped being afraid, but because losing the connection now feels scarier than vulnerability itself. That is real emotional transformation. And here's something many people misunderstand. Growth for avoidance often happens gradually, not dramatically. It's the small, consistent shifts that reveal the deepest feelings, the extra effort, the increased openness, the softer communication, the willingness to reconnect after shutting down, the attempts to include you emotionally instead of keeping everything hidden. These things are not random. They are signs that love is reshaping emotional patterns that once seemed permanent. And perhaps the most beautiful part is this. When an avoidant truly loves you, they often begin discovering a version of themselves they never believed was possible. A version capable of deeper intimacy, deeper trust, deeper emotional honesty. Not because you fixed them, but because love gave them a reason to stop running from themselves. That's powerful, because the right connection does not just create emotion, it creates growth. So if an avoidant starts becoming more emotionally open, more communicative, more self-aware, more present, and more willing to confront their fears because they genuinely don't want to lose what they have with you, understand the depth of what is happening. You are witnessing someone slowly dismantling emotional walls they spent years building for survival. And people only do that when the love they feel becomes stronger than the fear they once lived by.